I just found out this was not recorded before, so I'm sorry. I'm going to start over again and say that this is the MSR Flamekeepers Big Question webinar on April 29th with our guest, Richard Peregoy, whose big question is, how does the unchanging natural law, Western and Eastern, influence proposed effective action steps to address spirituality, mindfulness, and sustainability? And so if you're not muted, please mute, except for Richard. Richard, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. As you know, I prefer to start my discussions and presentations, and this is a discussion, with a simple mantra. And if you will, please bear with me and join in. The mantra has three parts. The first is, why am I here? And the second part is, what do I want to accomplish while I am here? And the third part is, how may I help others to achieve what they wish to achieve while they are here? Thank you. Now, the outline which you have is basically a series of statements. There are four essential parts to it as I see it. And looking at this, I would take the first part as saying that this is a liminal period for us, an opportunity, a threshold, as we come through the coronavirus to emerge into a world that is going to be different. So as we see that difference, we look forward to what it's going to be, and we look back, and we go back and we see that the natural law is unchanging. And this gives, at least for me, a deep sense of solid foundation that I can go to the natural law. I can think about it. I can read it. I can see it in different perspectives. And it says, okay, this too shall pass. And as we go, that natural law remains unchanged. So understanding that, as I was taught from high school on, and trying to live it as I see it today, it leads me to today's basic research or search and say, okay, what else is it that I need? Now, I'm an active meditator and have been for many, many years. Well, I have a colleague in China, in Beijing, and it's now 1 o'clock in the morning. So she said, thank you very much. Go ahead. But as you wish, please jump in at any time and we can discuss, or you can question back and forth, and we'll go from there. But the natural law in the Western world is essentially from the Greek and the Roman. And as we see Aristotle, we read Aristotle, one of the things that comes across in his Nicomachean Ethics is the first line: all men want to know. So how do we know? We know from the philosophers, we know from the theologians, we know from the scientists. The scientists are much more firm. They want to see it. Tell me factually, does this work? Experiment, does it work? The philosopher is much more liberal. A theologian becomes much more restrictive. But as we go forward from the Greeks of Aristotle and the Romans of Cicero, We move into this idea of the theological aspect of Aquinas, and he brings us to this aspect of saying, yes, the spirituality is there. And he says the spirituality arises from the natural law. And then he goes off and talks about religion. And as he does so, he confuses, at least in my mind, the idea of the natural law. So he confused a number of other people, one of whom was Suarez. And Suarez, at the time, a contemporary of Aristotle's, a little later, separated this out. He says, yeah, here's the natural law, and here's the natural legal law. So when we think about natural law and natural rights in the Western part, we instantly come to the idea of these are the rights of man. When you consider that, and you can come down those two tracks, you can see the link between religion and philosophy. You can see the spiritual roots for all of this. We go over now and we look at the Eastern side. And for this, I really rely a lot upon Rachel Wang, because she introduced me to the concept of wuity. That's W-U-I-T-Y. And I've been familiar with Taoism and Hinduism, the Buddhist practices. I certainly am not expert in any of them. But an understanding of wuity comes out of Lao Tzu. And in that, it says, basically, we find ourselves in a mindful state. And as we are mindful, the appearances that are evident to us in the mindful state really, in effect, are expressed in art and in poetry. And you see this particularly in Chinese calligraphy, you see it in the paintings. When you go beyond that, it says, if you contemplate upon these, you are thinking also and opening yourself to action steps. So both in the Western and Eastern ideas, the idea of spirituality runs, the idea of it being concrete and unchangeable. And beyond that, it says, well, it's one thing to think about it, but what are you going to do about it? What are the actions? So the link is there between the contemplative and the actor, between, if you will, the academician and the practitioner. So we bring those two together and we say, okay, if you look at this further and you go and you talk about, well, is this truly evident? Is this amongst everyone? And the research would suggest that the indigenous peoples do the same thing. I've had some of my students write papers because they come from backgrounds quite different from mine. And in their research of their home countries, they find that this is a factual element, that the indigenous people all look at the natural and they bear from the natural, the way in which they treat each other, the customs that they develop, and the patterns and the habits. So the spiritual area is with us as we are civilized. It's with us as we are in the natural indigenous states. And it remains with us today if we are to contemplate it and to think about it. How do we do this? I think that there are a number of ways of being spiritual as there are people. And a lot of us follow a particular spiritual regimen. Others are more eclectic and open. And it does seem, though, that all of the spirituality takes us to this sense of, can I be mindful as opposed to mindless? And as we become mindful, there is also usually an element of quietness. And in the quiet of our own meditative state, our own meditation takes many, many different forms, including yoga. How can we effectively come through the meditative state and, having contemplated, be open and aware to what is going to be our action steps? So the writers and the research would suggest that the sustainability issue that we are facing is one that, as we are in this liminal epoch, we come out of it and we see, okay, what really have we been doing to address the issues of sustainability? And if you think about that, both in terms of what we think is important, climate control, the ideas of inequities in the sharing of the world's goods and the wealth, we can see that there is an awful lot of room, as we reflect on these things, as we spiritually, religiously, mindfully consider what is it that we can do. Now, in both the Western and Eastern worlds and practices, the mindfulness of natural law is dominant. It forces us to think about simple things. And as we see the simple things, we say, oh, yes, this answer is complex, but in its simplicity, I can take part of it and work on it and see whether or not I can start to unravel or start to construct a whole cloth. So the global system, we can get that from the support for this in the Western world, particularly from Ellen Langer, who has made a whole lot of sense for people who are in the management or business world in bringing mindfulness to the attention and saying, look, this has a very practical aspect. Much of what has been presented by John Kabat-Zinn is useful, especially in the medical field. I was fortunate enough to be with a professor from the Duke Medical School, and also talking with a forensic psychiatrist. And I said to them, how do you guys use this meditation stuff? And both of them independently said, with health and the characteristics of people who are suffering, it is extremely useful because it gets them to think differently and it quiets them down. And as the mind is quiet, you can open into them the ideas of, here is a better practice. So if it works that well with people who have problems, and that includes everybody in the world, then if we are open through this mindfulness, how can we insert, or how can we address the issues that are important? The concept, the central theme to it, is that you move again through the contemplative action to the action state. And the integrated tool, it seems to me, is an evolution to altering the traits. And this is the title of a book by Goldman and Richardson, that from altered states to altered traits. Goldman has an interesting background. You can check that out for yourself. And as we go and we look at this and we say, okay, it really works well. It really works well. And here is the interesting thing from both the ancients and the modern, from the ancient philosophers to the modern scientists, is that we see the changed mindset. And Chris Laszlo is very specific on this point, that we need to have a changed mindset on the parts of managers and the parts of organizational leaders, and also on the parts of organizational members.
And Richard, Chris is on the call. Chris is also a member of the Flamekeepers committee. So I just wanted to let you know Chris is here.
Yes, he is. So step in. You're the expert in this area. You step right in and correct me or add to this, change it as we need to. This idea of changing the mindset, it also has a lot of history to it as we think about the way organizations have changed. And a lot of times we in management think of the flavor of the week, or here's the kind of thing that is happening, and wow, we got to jump on that and do it. But so many of them are flashes. And yet in these flashes, we can see some sparks which light fires. And as the fires burn, we can take what we learned from those flashes and move forward. So if you think about changing organizations, you can think about very simple, the change of you unfreeze what you are currently doing, you install what it is that you want to install, and then you freeze that in place. So it's the same thing that this psychologist from Duke and the psychiatrist from Trenton, New Jersey, were telling me about the same thing. They're doing the same thing. They're doing it with medical intervention. Well, why can't we do this with management intervention? Why can't we back off from, gotta do it, gotta do it, gotta do it, our push and our thrust, which comes ingrained into us, that, to use the terms in common in Wall Street, quote, greed prevails. To looking at this and saying, whoa, 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 whoa. How do we really share the benefits of this wonderful, wonderful world that we have and have them share with everybody? We continue to exhaust our resources, we won't have anything to share. But if we are appropriate in our thinking and our actions, we can continue to pursue a path of progress that takes into consideration all of the needs, not just for ourselves, but for the future generation. Now, as we think about this, and since I teach, amongst other management, I say, how do we apply this to the concepts of strategic management? And how do we get them to work? And looking at that, it seems that there are any number of methods of strategic management. I don't think there is one. I think Mintzberg said there were 10, and he had stopped counting after that number, but I think there are a lot more. So if we look at it, it seems also that we have to start what a sense of purpose. What is really the vision that we see? And how does this vision become the driving force for what we're attempting to do. And then we need a method by which that vision becomes real. So we understand what our missions are. How do we accomplish them? We need an understanding of the resources that we need for this. How do we implement them? How do we get them to go? And then we need to be able to measure and evaluate. And as we do so, we see that there is not just one way to do this, but there are any number of ways. So we take the one that fits us, and as it fits us, we practice with it and we amend it, and we are open to change. So change is essential. Change is paramount. Change is going to happen. And that's where we go. So in a few minutes, that's about where I see the Western, the Eastern, the mindfulness, need for the change mindset, and the idea of the strategic management. So please, let me stop talking. Let me bring you into this. We discuss this. So unmute yourself and talk.
You want me to say something, Judy?
Yes, please, Jerry.
Okay, well,
Jerry is, go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Jerry.
I was listening to what you were saying, and I thought, how can I put this in the simplest possible way to make sense to me? Anyway, so that's why I wrote in the chat thing that it sounds to me what you were saying. Okay, my understanding of natural law, at least from the Western perspective, if I'm getting this, it's a philosophical thing, right? And it has to do with the way people, well, as you said, it's all male centric. So it's usually written up the way man thinks and the way man is and the way, you know, but it seems to be a basic idea that part of natural law is the spiritual practice or the trying to figure out what's going on. And in the Western approach has a lot to do with asking questions and eventually could lead to something like mindfulness, at least being aware of what's going on. Whereas in the Eastern approaches, they're way more just explicit. You know, meditation is part of both Western and Eastern approaches. So anyways, it sounded like it's a very natural thing for people to be questioning and very natural for people to be meditating or becoming more aware of what's going on. And then as we become more aware of what's happening, this then leads to the awareness that, oh, I could, things either are right or they're not right, or things need to change. And then that leads to the awareness of possible ways to change. Am I getting this right? I mean, it sounds like basically that's the idea. And that reminds me a lot of, when you mentioned Lewin, that reminds me of the whole T groups and change theory and the basic idea that, you know, T groups were set up in such a way to create tension and anxiety, which would make people break down their pattern, kind of like brainwashing them. Break down their current ways of thinking and be open to new ways of thinking. And then that led to organization development, which was taking the T group approach and applying it more on a organization level. So the concepts I've been saying have been around for a long time. I always thought when I was first, when we first started writing about this stuff, that the only way you could change, the only way that a leader, let's say, would change is if they came to the awareness themselves that they needed to change. And, one of the key concepts behind T groups and change theory was you couldn't change another person. The person would only change if they felt the need to change and wanted to change. So that's what I'm getting from what you were saying. And I think, the only other thing I'd add is, given what's going on now with everybody being like stuck at home thanks to coronavirus, is we have a perfect opportunity now to either change or, I mean, things are certainly creating a lot of anxiety in people. And it leads to, I just heard somebody talking on another program about either people are going to come out of this way healthier or they're going to come out of this way heavier and sicker. And it's all based on the decisions that we decide to make while we're stuck at home right now. Do we want to try to be more healthy, work on ourselves, look at this as like a retreat? Or do we want to just be upset and start blaming people? So that's my comment.
Wonderful, Jerry. Thank you so much. You're reminding me of an article that I wrote with David Banner and Benjamin Lichtenstein years ago about how transformation takes place. And we talked about grace and miracles. It's like you can't make it happen, whether it's individual or team or organizational. It's, we primarily said it's really a moment of grace that the three of us believed was a grace that comes from God. But there might be other beliefs around grace, but that's just reminding me of what you said. There's a conversation going on in the chat with Anil talking about the comparing mindfulness and transcendence. And Anil, I'd like you to, several people are liking what you're saying, and I'd like to have you expand on that, and we can get in a conversation about that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Richard. You summarized everything very beautifully. And wholeness is that, it's all spirituality is in a sense about getting to that wholeness, that oneness, that ephemeral, unmanifest reality that we all intuitively relate to. Some people call it God, some would call nature, some would call consciousness, whatever it is. And how do we relate ourselves to that oneness, that some unified value? Natural law is one great way, Prakriti, that's kind of a way in which it manifests in the world. So certain amount of Eastern Vedic side, there's certain people probably from the more Buddhist kind of tradition might be on this call, but from the Vedic side, there is a sense that there's a belief that consciousness is all there is. We are conscious, and that consciousness leads to thoughts, which leads to manifestation, and that's how new things keep coming up. I can relate to many people. I like Steve Covey, and he used to say, mental creation precedes physical creation. And I would say even before mental, where do thoughts come from? They come from where? So the point of view from quantum field theory, one would say it's all oneness and there's no real separation. And so that's where do telepathy, and sometimes some people say, oh, I was having the same thought, because thought, the vibration is in the air. So where am I getting at is that there is a certain level of oneness that we know exists in some way, and it is the law of nature, and it can expand beyond people to include all life forms, the whole planet, the whole universe. And when we are in that sense of connection, or what Chris Laszlo has been calling the science of interconnectedness, again coming from quantum perspective. So the idea that if we feel that we are in that connectedness, and Judy, you famously said the other day when there is no me. So there is a me and there is no me at that level. So once we get into that wholeness, it's very blissful because we feel unbounded. There's no limits to that oneness. And then when we get ideas from that oneness, they are all automatically aligned with the totality of laws of nature that we are tapping into. So the chance of other people liking it, agreeing it, is so much more, and the chance of its fructification is going to be more. So in terms of sustainability, is naturally sustainable because not violating anybody's sort of holistic sense of how life should be, and we just feel all more blissful and more peaceful. And if I can, so that was overall. And if I may just touch on one point, Richard, you said we need a vision. So I think the vision is a peaceful and blissful world. Like we should work towards world peace. I think we all can have it. We have the technologies. If the world wants, we can get peace very, very quickly. And we have the research to back that up. We have the technologies of Vedic consciousness. But that is another discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Anil. You know, I heard in the news several days ago, and I haven't heard the last of what the result is, but what I heard was that the United Nations Security Council members are talking about a global ceasefire during the pandemic. And their reasoning is they should be focusing on healing, not war. Of course, just during the pandemic. I suppose after everybody's died from the pandemic, they'll go back to killing each other again. I don't know. But what I heard was 4 of the 5 members of the Security Council have agreed to a global ceasefire. Putin was working on the details of it and did plan to agree to it. And so we actually might see world peace. It seems to be unfolding in this moment temporarily. And maybe once people have had a taste of it, they might say this is a good thing.
It won't happen.
Well, Gary, now that you have taught, is it Gary A or Garia?
Gary Averill.
Yeah, okay, Gary Averill. Gary, you had made some comments on the sidebar. So go ahead, you've jumped in and keep going.
It's not who we are. We are not meant to be, not everybody is meant to be peaceful. It is, someone's going to say, oh, this peace, we can use it to make more money. I can take more control. It is not part of, one theory is that there are multiple levels of people on earth at different levels of spirituality. If that is the case, the ones at the lower level see money and other things more important than they do as spirituality. So I don't think there ever could be on earth a peace that if I've also been thinking that this pandemic, I'm going to go into the new age, but they've also talked about the indigo people, about this farther along in the spirituality. It seems strange that people now are really have no other choice but to look at who they really are at the moment they are now. And we've never had that in so long. But there's so many ideas I'm working on, but that's just one for right now. When you're on home for 2 months, you get to think.
Yeah, that has its benefits and its shadow side, doesn't it?
I want to add something to what Gary was just saying. I remember reading a few years ago. I was really into reading David R. Hawkins. I'm not so much into him anymore, but he did make the point that I think he said something like 98% of human history we were at war. I think it's less than 2% at a time in the whole history of humans that there wasn't a war going on somewhere. Also, the thing you were mentioning reminds me of, spiral dynamics and Ken Wilber and all the other things where you're talking about the levels of consciousness. It's an interesting point. I mean, Wilbur pointed out, so that they all point out that people have to go through the levels. You don't just jump up to the top level. You have to progress through them. But you could also balance that with another thing that I think Hawkins was saying was that the top 5% of consciousness can overbalance the other 95% of lower consciousness, something like that. There's a Jewish term that I think it's something like 5, or at any time there's 10 holy people in the world that are keeping the world going. It's kind of a similar idea, that the few people of really high consciousness can make up for a lot of the people at lower consciousness, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, can I chime on that? And that's a very beautiful point, Jerry. I appreciate that. This whole idea of collective consciousness, that we can all contribute to it individually, and the more evolved the plane of sort of more purified consciousness we are, our contribution sort of maybe adds a little bit more. And if you look at the 4 phases of life in the Vedic system, the 4th one is actually to renounce the whole world and go away, which doesn't mean you die. You just live to just contribute to the consciousness, the purity, so that people who are living in the grahastha or the the economic and the sort of child rearing world can benefit from the security blanket of peace that you create through that. And those activities can be simulated, with active researchers who have done that even at younger age, and they can be sages at different ages, and we can have them meditate together in a coordinated, coherent way, and inject coherence into the collective consciousness, which will negate the negativity and hostility and create world peace.
Can I come in on this, Judy?
Oh, hi. How are you, June? It's wonderful to see you. Yes, please.
June, look at June.
Well,
June.
I think I want to say a number of things about what have been said. One is that the Aristotelian view of eudaimonia actually was much more about ethical behavior and how you operate in relation to one another. The idea of contemplation and mindfulness is entered when it's translated into Latin, and Thomas Aquinas, which you mentioned, Richard, gets hold of it. But Thomas Aquinas puts in that notion of contemplation in the Middle Ages. Most of the Greek work in Aristotle and so on is largely about how do we behave ethically, and we will be at our happiest if we behave ethically and respectfully to other people. And it seems to me the area that we have not looked at, we're looking at the East and the West, but what about Africa? I think that we still have to learn from Ubuntu, which is basically a concept that Africa brings to us, which is that none of us exist individually. We only exist because other people exist. Now that's totally countercultural to all of the individualism after the Enlightenment, which I in general call the Endarkenment. At the Endarkenment, we lost the notion that Hildegard in the Middle Ages had in Europe, that we are all connected not only with one another, but inextricably with the trees, the earth, the fire, and the water. And that was lost at the Enlightenment. And my problem with Wilber is that he tends to dismiss some of those, what he calls tribal consciousnesses, as lower forms of consciousness. They indeed do not indulge quite often in the sort of mindful practices of sitting quietly, but their mindfulness is often through elaborate ritual, dance and music and dance, bringing people together in a powerful way. And in a sense, there are forms, and my problem with the way mindfulness has gone, that it sets itself up as the only way of being transcendent. And there are lots of other ways of transcendence which are not sitting quietly. And I think the absence of women from many of these debates has skewed the debate, because many women have to find that mindfulness over the whole course of history, including the age of Aristotle and Aquinas, not by sitting quietly where there wasn't much time for it, but by actually accomplishing a lot of practical tasks. And the notion that knitting, sewing, all of that was in fact a very important form of mindfulness, and that the absence of women has actually, when I was younger, which is a long time ago now, every woman had her knitting, and knitting was a wonderful way of mindfulness because it stilled the mind through the constant moving of the fingers. And we see that in the church with the rosary, with the beads of Islam, and so on and so forth. Many cultures have those beads which pass through to still the mind. So I think that we need, the way that we get some sort of sense of what a natural law might be is by including, in a sense, a greater all the continents and all the different sorts of people in them, remembering that the findings of the ancient Greeks came almost exclusively from rich males in that culture. And therefore, we need to bring those other voices in. And I'm going to end with a story that the Mi'kmaq people in Canada told me about the Great Spirit. Their version of the Great Spirit was the Great Spirit was very worried about war, extremely worried about war. But then the Great Spirit had a wonderful idea. The Great Spirit said, my idea is I will give some wisdom to the white people, some to the red people, some to the yellow people, and some to the black people. Now, this is a marvelous idea, said the Great Spirit, because they will all know that they need to get on with one another to get the totality of the wisdom. The only problem with this story, as the Mi'kmaq storyteller told me, was that the white people thought they had it all. And so I think that the notion that the white cultures do not have it all, and you have very carefully, Richard, included the Eastern cultures, but I'm a professor in South Africa as well as in the UK. I have learned an immense amount from the traditions that have been brought up in Ubuntu through dance, through song, and you see it in the culture there, where the black villages have very few walls, often doors not locked, whereas the white cultures there have large walls and keys and lots of security. So I think I'd like to bring Ubuntu into this discussion because I think we need it. I only exist because other people and the natural world exists.
Amen.
And Jeffrey is going to jump into this conversation because he is from Africa.
Yes, thank you, Judy, and very nice to be here. All right. Like Julie has really said, the Ubuntu is really so much now in rural Africa here. And where, for example, somebody sees that we are one, we are into this together. When you're into business, for example, if you succeed my prayer, and by me having is because you lack. So therefore, we need to share the little that we have. There's even a saying that the food that is meant for 5 people, 10 people can eat and they're all satisfied. So that oneness is so real here, especially in Africa. Though now in the urban centers, back when you go back home, there's still a lot of communality and oneness. Thank you for that.
And thank you,
I was in a conversation with an African student who was trying really hard. We spent 1.5 hours to see how the notion of Ubuntu fitted with the Christian concept of the Trinity. So it was wonderful to hear a person who'd been brought up in Ubuntu trying to bring it together with the Western concepts of Christianity and to make sense of the two together and to see what the natural law, to use your phrase, Richard, how the natural law of the two traditions can be brought together in some way, which is exactly what Aquinas did when he tried to bring the law of Christianity together with the Greek law of Aristotle. I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, June. I hope you look at the comments afterwards, June, because I'll send the copies of the recordings and the comments. And you have a lot of people going, amen, and speak it, sister. And a lot of real support for what you're saying. And we're glad you're with us. If Lowell Grisham is available to talk, Lowell, I'd like to invite you into this conversation. Lowell is my minister from the Episcopal Church here in Fayetteville, and has retired, but still is a wonderful member of our religious and general community. Lowell, any thoughts that you'd like to share?
I'm enjoying being part of this conversation, the weaving together of the different traditions from all around the world seems so important, so critical. And for me, the outbreak of the COVID infection gives especially Westerners an opportunity to break out of the boundaries that we've been in for so long. finally something has gotten into our body, and it's gotten us to realize that walls and culture and all the ways that we create our own mirrors just aren't reflecting reality. So it seems like this is a great opportunity for folks like me and people who grew up in the kind of culture I did to recognize that we're all one, and we have to be in this. Every commercial now says we're all in this together. I'm so glad to see that, and I'm not going to so thank you for bringing the insights from so many different places.
I think if we go back to management, I think there's a lot of that in the UK saying we're in this together. But the tragedy of the UK, and I can't speak for anywhere else, is that we're not. The ethnic minorities, the poor, the marginalized, and all of that are having far more devastation from the virus than actually the rich and the wealthy. And I think this is a huge dilemma. It's showing the figures alone are showing the discrepancy between the rich and the poor. And I think that's something that we need to look at very carefully. My son is working in a hostel for men with complex needs, with learning difficulties, addiction, and mental health issues. And in a sense, that world and the world of the homeless is really struggling in a way that those of us who have nice houses with nice gardens, even though we're shut in them, are not struggling in exactly the same way. And I think for us in the UK, we need to look at who's dying more often. And undoubtedly, it is the ethnic minorities and the generally marginalized and the poor in general.
It's not just the UK, that's here too.
Another thought in response to that on a more practical and even political level. So it's about the debate in the United States and other places about what should be done. Should we reopen? And the general perspective from people of a liberal persuasion, such as myself on the whole, in the United States is no, look at the deaths that will occur. And yet those of us who are talking about it are almost entirely in the upper class or upper middle class, and in fact are fairly comfortable with things being shut down, perhaps not forever, but for now. We might get a little bit annoyed that we can't go to the theater, but we have enough to eat, people can feed their children, and so forth. And so I think that's a practical consideration of this issue, and we can divide it into ethnic classes and tribal groups and colors, but fundamental thing is what position people are to deal with it. So I am distressed when, it took me a while to get there, when I hear people that I think of as a similar mindset to myself saying, oh, those who are talking about the reopening the economy instead of the deaths are bad and evil. I'm not sure that that's true.
Well, in England, what some people are saying that because we haven't managed to help the poor, that people will die of starvation before they die of the virus, because there's no income. And the way in which the government is handling it here is pots of money. I must admit that after this and after the film I, Daniel Blake, and this has driven me even further down the line, what we need is a universal basic income. And if we had that, then in fact, a lot of the little pots of money, which the government's sort of announcing and saying so wonderfully that they're doing this, actually, those people trying to access the pots of money can't get at it because the bureaucracy is so terrific around it that you can't get it. If we had a universal basic income, then it would be much more simple to administer. It may be more unfair, some people would say, but it seems to me an important thing to look at.
So just to respond for a moment to that, so it's not unfair. So back when, I'm now a recovering economist for many decades, but back when I was an economist, one of the things I used to point out to my students was that we think about who should get what and what have we contributed and how hard have I worked and how much have I done. But the fact is, and it was interesting that Warren Buffett pointed it out in a way, that we are all the beneficiaries of millennia of human development, and actually before human development, if you like. So the idea that those who are successful in getting more of the pie for themselves are more deserving is, I think, questionable.
That's right. Well, there's a wonderful book called The Myth of the Undeserving Poor, and that's around quite a lot in the UK at the moment, that the poor are poor because they've messed up and it's their fault. And of course, when we do exercise mindfulness on what's happened, that is very far from the truth. It's actually remarkably easy to be poor, and often not people's fault at all. But that myth of the undeserving poor is around, particularly in who's been restricted. So the failure in our country to actually help the old people's homes because the people in them are not regarded as valuable because they don't bring any money in. The fact that everybody over 70, ill, well, or what have you, has been incarcerated, whereas other people haven't. The notion that some people are worth more than others, and the only people who are valuable are the people who earn money. Shows you that the poor is not undeserving. It's just the way in which the leaders tend to set up, you know, all of that. But the myth of the undeserving poor, I think, is a dangerous one.
When I was a single mother, I remember reading that many women in the United States, and it's probably other places in the world too, are one divorce away from poverty.
Well, that's happened here because the government has just said that child support doesn't need to be paid if the man who's doing it hasn't got any income. What they haven't said is how the single parent is supposed to manage when they haven't got the child support coming in, which they were dependent on. They haven't managed to put those together. So there are huge holes in the way that our particular government is seeing the whole pattern and only seeing bits of the pattern.
So let's open this up to anybody who has not had a chance to speak yet that wants to jump into the conversation.
Judy, this is Gladys.
Hi, Gladys. And Gladys, introduce yourself so people know who you are.
I'm Gladys Tiffany. I'm a friend of Judy's from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we know each other in several different respects, and I'm the director of Omni Center for Peace, Justice, and Ecology. What I'm really hearing in so many ways is how we are struggling to enhance the value system that, in my mind, I call it the progressive value system, and I'm not sure whether everybody agrees what that might be, but I think that focus around the welfare of people and planet and community, the way that we're talking about it, really is a value system that we are endorsing and promoting, as opposed to this authoritarian value system that we're seeing operate the way it is. And I really think that part of what we could be putting thought to is, how can we enhance that movement toward a progressive value system in whatever small ways that we can individually and within our own networks? And how can we actually assist our country and our culture and our world to move in a direction that really can make these decisions that are in the benefit of welfare for people and planet and community? That I think we don't have a progressive consensus on how that would happen, but I think that that's part of what we're struggling toward, is how can we do that? Because I think the authoritarian value system has a very clear consensus on how to operate, and we don't. And we are really working to kind of pull together some way of operating upon our own democratic and the values that actually endorse the equality of all people. How can we actually do that? And I think as we kind of come to a point where we can say, okay, we have a plan, then I think we're going to be in a place where we can actually make these changes, and the authoritarian value system will be incapable of stopping us.
Gladys, I just read the other day a kind of broader history of authoritarian systems, and it said over time they collapse in on themselves over and over and over again. And maybe we're seeing some of that.
But unfortunately, they always take down so many people with them when they do.
Oh, God.
You're right. Joel, you want to jump in?
Oh, just to reflect, one of my deepest concerns always is that we are, it seems to me anyway, dominated and controlled by so very few. And whatever level of consciousness they are, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be one that will remotely like we're talking about. And I don't know how to enlighten that group, given the influence that they have over so many. Is that the human fate always? Any thoughts on that?
I would like to, on that note, I think that one of our problems has always been it's an us them kind of attitude that we seem to take wherever we go. You know, do those people not think right? You know, why are they acting that way? They're authoritarian, they're patriarchal, they're other, they're, the men or the whomever. And I think this time period is offering what's going on now. It's offering us a choice to step out of the polarity consciousness into a wholeness consciousness. We're all in this together. You know, whether you're wealthy, whether you're poor, whether you're black, whether you're white, this has crossed all different races, economic levels, political boundaries, geographic boundaries, national boundaries. It is a time for us to step forward in a place of how can I understand you? Seek ye to understand before being understood. How do I understand why somebody is acting or behaving or believing from a certain point? How do I help them move with awareness instead of fear? Mindfulness isn't just about meditation. It's about being aware of each other, aware of ourselves, aware of what's going on, and aware how our actions ripple out and affect the whole. And I think any kind of movement at this point to be effective has to step out of the polarities and the labeling. We just, and I see it starting to happen in the news a little bit, the media is constantly trying to pit politically one party against another. And I see a little bit less that going on now because it's just intolerable to live in the hostility all the time.
Yeah, you're reminding me, Marianne, of Ken Wilber's concept of transcend and include. That's how we collectively raise our consciousness instead of the polarities and the us versus them. I'd like to ask Jody Fry to jump into the conversation. He's been working on these kinds of ideas for probably one of the most quoted people in the management, spirituality, and religion area in terms of spiritual leadership and dealing with all of these kinds of issues that we're raising. So Jody, would you jump in?
Thank you, Judy. I'm sorry I was late. I had another call and I just got off of it, so I apologize for coming in late. This just reminds me, in many ways I see my work as building upon the brilliance of, not that I'm in that world, in that category, the brilliance of Andre Delbecq. And of course I spoke to that some in the special issue, but the whole idea we have to start with the fundamental dignity of every human being, and that we've got, and that means we come from both and, not either or. And the left and the right are both guilty of demonization to the ultimate. And until that cycle can be broken, there'll never be any any true dialogue or any true chance for any kind of transcendence together. And the other person it brings to mind, because this is an area I work in, is Eckhart Tolle's The New Earth. And he talks about, and this is the area that I work in. I teach now, I've moved in the area of sustainability. We have a Master's of Science in One Planet Leadership. So I'm working more into how can we truly be one, including, you know, more than us humans. And he talks about, and I'm working in the area right now of leadership formation and personal transformation of leaders. That's really where I've moved away from the organizational focus in spiritual leadership. And he talks about achieving this critical mass, and it may be this 5% you were talking about. That, you know, and this is one of the problems with the sustainability movement. They're so obsessed with transforming at the systems level, which could be the national level or the political level. When ultimately, when it's really going to happen is when we have a critical mass of people who have embarked on the spiritual journey and are committed to being conscious. And then we'll have, we said this in our book, then we'll have awake and conscious teams and conscious organizations, and then maybe we'll change the system. So my focus is, and I always talk about, you know, you brought up, you know, how can we get these people to, you know, at least listen to us or see us, you know? And I've approached it, because this is the same issue I've had over the last 20 years with spiritual leadership, is I don't. Well, I look for the people who are predisposed, who are looking, who want to listen, and to try to find those people and engage them in dialogue, and then to create coalitions and collaborative networks and seek other networks that are the same. And so, rather than try to charge the windmill or beat my head against the wall, you know, I can't beat somebody's head against the wall and the ears pop out. So
That's
you know,
where God comes in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And ultimately, that's, you know, that's where we have to operate, is within that sphere. And of course, that takes, for me, that takes also strength from a higher power, which includes not only as a, you know, transcendent being that I have committed myself to, that I choose to call God, but also God speaks to me through other people, such as you. That's one reason I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody. So I think Yochanan is on the call, and Yochanan is another one of the Flamekeepers. I wondered if Yochanan would like to add anything. Let me just have to look at the overall view to make sure he's here. Yochanan, are you here? Maybe not. Maybe he had to leave. Some people do. I'd also like to invite Paul Schmidt, if you're interested in joining the conversation. Paul and I just recently met through the Conscious Leadership Guild, and Paul has a deep commitment to sustainability as well as to spirituality. So I think you might have something to add to this conversation, Paul, if you'd like.
Thank you very much, Judy. I will just be completely transparent and admit that I've done something rare for me, which is slip into the anonymity of Zoom and just kind of being an observer here. So really, Judy, I appreciate the nudge, because I will not deny the opportunity to share. And yeah, fascinated by the conversation, really happy and actually pleased to be discovering a new group, you know, a new tribe. That's one of the gifts of this time, is that the nature of community is shifting. And it's interesting to me on one level, because, and this speaks to the conversation indirectly, but I'll let you connect the dots. One of the fascinating things to me is that there's I'm encouraged by the opportunity to shift our economy and our social structure to a localism, to a local-based situation, which will have many benefits if we can make that stick. But at the same time, the power of the virtual world and being able to bring So many diverse cultures and corners of the world into a conversation like this, I think will only benefit and accelerate what we're all passionate about here. Couple other points. One, and I'm just making observations here. I'm completely on board with non-duality. You know, we have to go to inclusiveness, and I'll just throw it out there. You know, on a call like this, we need more diversity. And I'm not just talking race. I'm not just talking age. I'm not just talking all the obvious things, but economic status. And you know, I work with a solution level vision, an organization called Verdant World, which carries a solution level vision for the recovery of the world's forests, which is a daunting task right now, but it confronts me daily. I started thinking that it was an environmental issue, and it's not. It's a social issue, a human issue. And I'm confronted daily with the reality that a bunch of wealthy, mostly white, but at least wealthy people are not going to get this done. You know, this is about inclusiveness. So I'm rambling. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I'm humbled to be in your presence. Judy, thank you for the invitation. I said there was another point, and there was. Let me see if I can recover that. And I can't, so I won't take up more airtime right now. I'll jump in if it was juicy and it returns to me. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So
can I come in on that localism? I've just been asked to write a chapter for an Oxford Companion on women in musical leadership. And what becomes clear when you look at women in those positions of leadership is that you do get exactly what the straightforward feminists, that they're setting up cooperative structures between the arts, between one another. So you've got not a single conductor, not a single composer, but a variety of composers working, a variety of conductors. And the notion that sometimes in some of my own works, those are people with learning difficulties or drawing on different cultures. I think the notion of betweenness is important, and that leadership need to include as great a variety of people as possible. And that's the exact reverse from what we've got. I mean, if you take our government in the UK, we've got the vast majority are educated at Eton and Oxbridge. That will never bring about any understanding of what it is to live in a high-rise flat in Brixton in London. And over again, they're making the mistakes which they wouldn't make if they had more of that variety. And the notion of setting up, as women have done in community music making and things, structures which are collaborative, but that challenges all the leadership style. And I'm old enough to remember that leadership in the industries in the UK was often from people who came from the bottom of the job up to management. And even in government, that was true. We had people who'd been shop floor workers in positions in the cabinet. That is no longer true. And I know I'm talking to people who are into management, but the invention of something called management that you could come into at that level without coming up through the working, I think has been quite a complex issue, because you didn't have people at the top who were aware of what was happening at the bottom. So I think that the notion of what management means and how people get there needs actually to be reconsidered.
thank you. Yeah. And, you know, you've spoken about a number of voices and people from different parts of the world. In fact, several people are talking about inclusiveness and having voices on this call that are more diverse. And we actually, with our Fetzer scholars especially, we do have some wonderful diversity that's enriching all of us. And some of them have spoken, but some of the Fetzer scholars have not yet spoken. And so I want to open the space for you if you'd like to, any of the Fetzer scholars, to add to the conversation. So you might say where you're calling from and anything about, just like a sentence or two about your research interests, just so we get to know you and get a sense of the diversity that's on the call. Anyone want to jump in?
Yes, thank you, Judy. My name is Green. So hello, everyone. It's my pleasure also to be in a very big group of international community like this who are interested in spirituality in the workplace. I'm from Thailand. I don't know if you know my country. And it's very, it's early morning or already in this country right now. Yes, it's 1 o'clock. 20 past 1 now.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much. I try to keep my eyes open. However, as Judy asked about my research interest, now I'm working as a lecturer and also at the same time I'm doing my doctoral dissertation, and I'm interested in doing the theory building on the organization development that can embed spirituality part, which from my review, my literature review, I found that the organization development process are much more focused on organization, but not the human who organize the organization, let's say. So this is my interest to do try to integrate not only the Eastern philosophy in spirituality, but also try to capture on the not all part, but some part of the quantum physics to really integrate both sides and to explain how spirituality is for everyone and how interconnectedness that as everyone says are very important for everyone in the organization. This is what I'm on my way. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. One of the things about the pandemic is that normally without it, the Fetzer scholars like Rin and like Jeffrey and others would come to the Academy of Management in Vancouver in August, and we'd get to meet you in person. It may not happen that way. It probably won't. We'll know in another week. But so if this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to connect with you in other ways. Rin, thank you. And I think Jeffrey was going to say something. Jeffrey, were you going to jump in? No, or
yes.
perhaps someone else would like to.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks
Okay.
so much. Well, I'm Geoffrey Wire. I'm from Uganda here in East Africa, but I'm a doctoral student at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. I really grew up from a rural countryside in Uganda, and when June Boyce was talking about Ubuntu, it is so real in Africa, and currently my research is about rural entrepreneurship, especially targeting women. And if you have had a chance to move in African countryside, you see a lot of women selling goods by the roadside, and the goods are very identical, and sometimes you could perhaps wonder, how does one choose to sell, and how do they sell? How can they sell so many identical things at one place? But that oneness in that they have their unwritten laws. For example, if you have already sold, then when another customer comes, you go back for another one to sell, and there's not competing, but they're just selling for societal well-being. So that's my research interest, but also from the lived example, spiritualism and religion is so rich in Africa. Everything, even if you are going to start a formal meeting, everything starts with prayer. If you are doing something and maybe the church is not into for it, then it may not succeed. So I found this quite close to what I do, and I'm extremely excited to be here. And this has been so fascinating to me, and I don't feel that it is late here. It is about 9, but I feel like it is midday for me because the discussion has been so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're really excited about your research and we look forward to learning more about it, however we end up being able to do that. Marcia, did you want to jump in? I know you need to leave.
I just wanted to share with everybody that something that, if you're familiar with Otto Scharmer's from MIT, and he's written about youth theory, and he's worked with Peter Senge. And he's been looking at change and how to bring groups together for a while now. But right now, he has just started a process called Gaia's Journey. And Gaia's Journey has started about 3 weeks ago and will go to the end of June. And 1 week is what he calls Exhale, where he brings people from all over the world. And when I say from all over the world, I'm saying he has 1,000 people on these calls broken down into like 4 different Zoom groups, huge. And then 1 week is Inhale, where you're in a smaller group. And there's a lot of contemplation and reflection, and he's graphically capturing all of this. And when I hear, about the need for meditation and contemplation and the going out and the going in, he calls it exhale and then inhale. You may have interest in looking this up. You can look it up. It's Pre-Sensing Institute in Gaia's Journey. They have a website, and I think you can still jump in at any time. It's a fascinating, fascinating process.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Everybody, Marcia was one of my doctoral students and is now doing a lot of wonderful work with wisdom traditions and children, helping to raise the next generation to be more conscious. So if anybody wants to get in touch with her, let me know. We just have a few more minutes. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? I want to leave the last 5 minutes or so for Richard Peregoy. But anybody else that hasn't spoken that wants to jump in?
Dr. Neal, this is Nan McClurg. We've communicated a couple of times.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I am here in East Texas at the University of Texas at Tyler. Last year, I completed my PhD in HRD, and the topic of my research was workplace spirituality, and I specifically looked at its impact on work teams. I used David King's the SISRI inventory, spiritual intelligence inventory, to do my research. And I work with international students here on campus, and this pandemic has created so much confusion, chaos, fear, anxiety, loss of jobs, back home from their sponsors, as well as on our campus with everything closing. Campus jobs have gone away, and day by day reaching out to these students who come from so many different backgrounds, just getting into that, finding that thread of spirituality, and then using it to put all your beads of solutions on that thread is such an amazing tool. And I think that that inventory, that spiritual intelligence, as some of you mentioned, this is a human issue, and kind of like the analogy of the music, we need people with all kinds of spiritual backgrounds to come together, sharpen their spiritual intelligence tools, and look at ways that communities can bond on that common thread to serve each other. We've got churches who are making masks and handing it out to our students, keeping social distancing, but cloth masks, but just reaching out human to human. And it's so hard to do that when you're supposed to be in isolation. And so finding creative, innovative ways to keep that spirituality at the forefront in everything you do, whether it's, fixing lunch for someone or calling them twice a week or creating a common place where you can drop things that they can pick it up. I mean, there's so many ways that we can reach out. And yes, I agree that we need to bring people from all economic, ethnic backgrounds to come together on that common sense of spirituality. We all have it, some have it sharper than others. Every once in a while, we have to pull out our tools and sharpen them. And I've read your work, I've read Dr. Fry's work. I mean, all of it has really inspired me to look at how, regardless of the root of your spirituality, the faith that you're raised in, we can all come together for a common ways to treat people with love, respect, and genuine way to include them in the solution. We really have to include everybody in the solutions we come up with. And this panel, it's really exciting to hear all the ideas and thoughts that are being shared here from so many different parts of the world. So I really appreciate being able to share my thoughts here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I say, Judy, that I've got a peace choir, which has got people from 5 continents meeting next Monday at 6 o'clock by Zoom, which is summertime. And people are waking up in Australia at 3 o'clock in the morning to join us. Some of you will know that Zoom won't synchronize. So I've composed a series of chants which don't require synchronizing. So we shall all sing together and it's called Singing for Cosmic Peace.
Wow. So if anybody wanted to join that, can they do that?
Yes,
this is Toyoko. Oh, sorry.
I'll
You can
send
go
it
ahead.
to you, Judy, and you can send it out.
Okay, thank you. Ken, yes, you wanted to jump in?
Oh, Toyoko, can I first?
Yes, you can. Please.
Okay. I'm Japan, and time is 3 sorry. So I'm also a little bit sleepy. But so what I want to add some point in our conversation, because so as a Japanese, so daily practical behavior like cleaning house, cleaning, it's kind of a chore. Action creates spiritual experiences, not sitting in the meditation room, not in the focus on reflect on the mind. No, just practice. All things can create a spiritual mind. Even so, frequently I told international friends, okay, if you want to hubris mind comes up in your mind, so please put your hand in your toilet bowl to clean up your toilet bowl.
Yeah.
It's a simple. If you want to create something great, so probably toilet bowl with your naked hand is a simple, tiny piece of work.
That's profound.
I guarantee you.
Very much in the present moment.
Yes.
Thank you, Ken. I'm
That's
so
all.
glad you joined us too. I hope you sleep well after this.
Oh, thank you.
And did Toyoko want to jump
Yes.
in as well?
Yes, I'm here from Copenhagen, and I would like to thank you, Richard Peregoy. Thank you, Richard. It was very wonderful lecture, and I was very interested in your lecture for a long time. So thank you, Judy, for this opportunity. And I'm interested in organizational symbioticity. That is how we can coexist together, and that's I'm studying for a long time. And this MSR opportunity give us, lots of possibility, and for that I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Toyoko. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Arigato.
Yes. And Toyoko is also one of our Fetzer scholars, so congratulations. And we're
Thank you.
looking forward to all being together either on Zoom or in person, even better. Someday. So I want to turn it back over to Richard, but first to thank everybody for being here from my many communities. I've actually been very touched because this is primarily supposed to be for the MSR community out of the Academy of Management. And I reached out to my other communities, the Edgewalker community and the Conscious Leadership Guild, and others. And to see all of you come from the different parts of my life and be a part of this one conversation about oneness and about the bridging of East and West, and then adding in the bridging of Africa and other parts of the world into this conversation about oneness and wisdom and healing and being present and the hand in the toilet bowl and all the things that everyone's contributed. It's just been very inspiring, and I will send out the link to the recordings, which will include the chat information as well. And before I turn it over to Richard, just to announce that our next MSR webinar, Flamekeepers webinar, is on June 17th with Yochanan Altman. And Yochanan, are you still on the call? Because you could say just a little bit about that.
Yes, I am. Hi everybody. Hi everybody. Let me start the video.
Thank you.
Greetings from the Canary Islands, where I'm shielding from the virus, and I have to confess it's a pleasant environment to be in.
And how did your test go? You and your wife took a test a few days ago.
Well, she was offered one, and she decided not to take one because she just showed that going to the hospital might expose her, so she didn't take it in the end.
Oh.
So yes, but she was offered one, and but she decided not to, and she's fine, thank you. Yes,
okay,
she kind of there was a question about her symptoms, whether they're related or not, and they're probably not. But anyway, yes. So yes, we're going to talk about something which is quite different in some ways. In some other ways, it's not, which is the darker side of spiritualities. I've become interested in anti-Semitism, partly because I'm Jewish, I suppose, partly because it's really one of those enigmas that has been following humankind for the last 2,000 odd years. And it manifests itself in some strange ways, including now with the coronavirus, you know. I'm going to probably present it as well when I talk about the latest conspiracy theories concerning the virus and the Jews. Some theorists say that the Jews invented the virus. Some say that, no, they didn't invent the virus, but nevertheless are the one who are to be blamed for it. Anyway, anti-Semitism has been with us for almost as long as history goes back, and I'm going to talk about it because it's not a topic that is often been talked about in the context of looking at spiritualities and the dark side of them. I'm occasioning it to a course that I'm running in Vienna now for the 4th year. The reason of Vienna is interesting, but partially it is because this is part of the enigmas. The Jewish population in Austria is absolutely tiny. We are talking something like maybe 10,000 people out of a population of about 8-9 million, which means that there almost is no possibility for the ordinary Austrian person to have met a Jew in their lifetime. Nevertheless, there is varying great ideas of what Jews look like and what they are like in Austria, and they are not necessarily positive. So I'm running this course. This time I have to run it virtually. So we're going to have another 18 of my students joining the occasion because I embedded it in the course.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's going to be really great for them, I'm sure, to have a lively audience from all over the world. And but anyway, I won't say more because I think Richard wants to complete his, and I'll have enough time to talk about mine. So thank you again, by the way, really a wonderful, wonderful event. Thank you all for this.
Yeah, thank you, Yochanan. Stay well.
Thank you.
Richard, please bring us on home. How would you like to wrap this up?
Thank you. I would simply say that the idea of inclusiveness has been running through the discussions. And underneath all of that is another concept of compassion. So call it compassion, call it love, but really it is this understanding that for us to do something about the possibilities of changing the sustainability, it will help us intensively. The more we engage people, the more we are considerate of inclusiveness. And I thank you all for this. And I would close with simply an expression, which means I salute the Buddha within you, that place within us where we are all one. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Judy.
And thank you, Richard. This was wonderful. Thank you, everybody. So we'll see you in June, if not before.
Yes, and I'll look for your recordings and we'll go from there.
All right, wonderful. And the recordings people can share with anybody they want.
It'll be wonderful. I'll share it with the university faculty.
Wonderful. Take care, everybody. Stay well, stay safe.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.